this. This is where I believe that too much power has been conferred to these agencies, where they enact policies and regulations such as this, which really aren't consistent with what the Congress passed. And they're our lawmakers who we elect to send to Washington. And, of course, they don't seem to be able to get anything done. And maybe that's not a bad thing, honestly. So the presidents sometimes, I guess, get a little miffed at that, and they just instruct their agencies to just do what I want you to do. And that's not the way the system's supposed to work.
No, and you're pointing out exactly what's wrong with this growth of the bureaucracy or the fourth branch of government. It is a breakdown of accountability. It's the elected representatives that represent we the people before at the state legislature, but also we're talking about the federal before U.S. Congress, the U.S. House, and the U.S. Senate. But you have these bureaucrats that are so emboldened, number one, and number two, they've gotten away with it for decades. And you have, for the first time in a really long time, you have a few court cases that have come down that are creating a check, one of them being the West Virginia versus EPA decision, and then that established the major questions doctrine, and then the overruling of Chevron deference. These are really important tools, but you have to have an administrative head, a la the president, willing to employ the use of those tools. You're not going to see it in this administration. Stakeholders have some ability to push the issue by filing lawsuits, but nonetheless, the bureaucracy has gotten away with a lack of accountability for a long time, and they will do what they want to do anyway. And what you're pointing out here with the student loans, they are outright ignoring what the Supreme Court said they could not do, because agencies only have the legal authority of which Congress actually grants them, and they have no legal grounds right here. And that the Supreme Court has reiterated this point time and again, but they keep doing it because it takes time for the checks and balances to ultimately catch up, short of an administration, a president coming in that's willing to get rid of half of them, to fire them all. Which an executive has that power, has the ability to do that. And President Trump has indicated a willingness to go down that path.
Plus, Mandy, it costs money to mount these lawsuits. I mean, somebody's got to pay to file and mount and argue and prosecute these lawsuits as well. You shouldn't have to do that, honestly, but we have to because we find our government, the executive branch here, constantly overreaching their boundaries. I honestly believe that Mr. Trump, in 2015, when he came out with the drain the swamp refrain, I honestly believe this is exactly what he was referring to, these career bureaucrats that get entrenched in these agencies. And he was simply exposing that they almost act without said accountability, as you refer to it, without proper checks. I've often thought, Mandy, that maybe we need term limits on these agency bureaucrats and the managerial state, as Vivek Ramaswamy refers to it.
The truth is, Gerard, I think a better solution is getting rid of about 40 to 50% of the existing federal workforce. Because if you look at bureaucracies, and this is, Reagan made it famous when he said, no, I'm paraphrasing here, but it doesn't matter how well-intentioned the start of an agency it begins. Eventually, it becomes the continuation of itself. And I saw that firsthand at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agencies. There were offices and sub-offices and subgroups that I don't know what they did all day. And I would ask them. And this became a point of contention, especially during COVID, because, I was commuting back and forth from Decatur, Mississippi. So I was seeing people who literally had lost their businesses, didn't know what they were going to do. I'd fly up to DC and I would have meetings with people who had no tangible work value, no tangible work product or deliverable that was helping fulfill the mission of EPA, yet they were demanding the continued receipt of their taxpayer provided payment, which was to the tune of $120,000 to $140,000 per year plus benefits. And they would complain about, during COVID, about having to potentially come in and sit in meetings with people to actually talk a little bit about what maybe they were supposed to be doing. But nonetheless, it shows you there is a detachment, there is a differences in approach to work and what it actually means from those who have the benefit of sitting on the pedestal of Washington, D.C. at the taxpayer's benefit versus we the people who live outside of it, and we actually reap the rewards or have to deal with the consequences of being able to produce valuable work.
So you take that scenario you just described there with your personal experience with the EPA, and then you just apply that across the agency spectrum. We're talking about real money at the end of the day, and it's a lot of taxpayer money that's not really producing any net value for the taxpayers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there is a pathway to get rid of these people. You've heard people talk about something called Schedule F, and important tool that a president willing to institute this policy, could actually establish accountability and create a line of at-will employment, that if a bureaucrat is not doing their job or it doesn't necessarily make sense, there's an avenue to get them off the taxpayer dole.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we use in the private sector. It's typically at-will employment. We had that included in all of our employment contracts. It basically means, you work here at our pleasure and at your pleasure. It's just mutual agreement. You can leave for any reason, and we can terminate you for any reason. It's just simple as that. That policy doesn't seem to apply often in the public sector, and that's how we end up with these career bureaucrats that I think get out over their skis and start to adopt an attitude of hubris, and they just do whatever the heck they want. And it affects our lives arguably more than what comes out of the Congress.
Yeah, that's right. And it's worse than that, Gerard, because there's some that actually use their position and their knowledge where they've been sitting in this one role for 10 to 20 years. So you have a political coming in, and they know that they're going to outlast that political. So they actually erect barriers to the effectiveness of implementing the president's vision. And so you have these activists that are actively working against the will of the people by virtue of ignoring directions from the president and the people he's put in charge at various agencies.
It's so frustrating. We could go on and on about that. But last night, Mr. Trump, of course, conducted what Elon Musk described as a conversation on Twitter Spaces. Did you catch any of that, and what did you think?
Yeah, I did. I tuned in. It started late because of the cyber attack, and that actually worked out well because that was right after dinner ended. And so I was able to tune in towards the debates. How much of a direct relationship the American people can have with someone like President Trump. He changed the expectations for voters when it comes to having direct communication and act to the President of the United States on down through his engagement in Twitter. And so that was on full display last night. I thought it was a wonderful conversation. They covered a lot of the issues. It's also a testament to President Trump's endurance. He could have kept talking for hours and hours and hours, but obviously I thought it was really well done.
Hang around. We're up against a break, and we can continue the discussion about that and also talk about Mississippi Women's Summit coming up next Monday. You're going to be hosting the Gallo Show, I believe, from Oxford, right, which is where the Oxford Convention Center, where that event will be occurring. We got Mandy Gunasekara, former EPA Chief of Staff, on the line with us on middays. We're coming right back after these. We're visiting with Mandy Gunasekara, former EPA Chief of Staff. So what was your take? First, I agree with you. His endurance is really incredible, especially for a man of his age, and I think he could have continued the discussion even further. And I guess we could contrast that to his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris, who's yet to conduct any sort of press conference whatsoever. I mean, she's had some rallies, but she's sort of shied away from the press at this point. Not sure exactly why. Any particular comments or takeaways that you thought were important from Mr. Trump's discussion with Elon Musk?
Yeah, I thought it was really clear he's talking about issues the American people care about. He really started out after talking about the assassination attempt and kind of going back through that, which really was a miracle. I mean, it was a modern day miracle that he survived that. And after that, from that,
Elon Musk even said, someone cannot act bravery. You either are or you run away from it. And what he saw really is what, as Elon said, got him behind President Trump. And so it was a really personal conversation. It was really cool to see between two people we hear about all the time and them have that level of discussion. From a policy perspective, though, he obviously talked about something he's really strong on, which is our nation's border that we've seen absolutely fall apart under border czar Kamala Harris and the lack of leadership of President Biden. He inherited the strongest border wall this country has seen ever, if not in recent history, as the southern countries have found a way to easily come over the border and come into this country. As you know, Gerard, my husband served as U.S. Customs Border Patrol head of policy, and he was only there for a few months, but they built more miles of border wall in that short period of time when they had everything lined up and ready to go than had ever been built. And this administration, all they had to do was keep it going, but instead they undermined the actual physical construction. They also undermined policies like Remain in Mexico and working with other countries south of us to detain people from coming in. We've seen the obliteration of the southern border, and what that's led to is crime in communities all across America. And President Trump made this very clear. It's not the best and the brightest that are coming across the border. It's terrorists, it's rapists, it's criminals. And he made a really important point that President Trump has said last night, but him and Elon had a pretty in-depth conversation about it. Other countries have found that it's much more economical for them just to send their criminals across the border for America to deal with it than for them to continue to jail and house them within their own countries. And so leading up to and painting the vastness of this problem, I thought that was really important. Americans care about it because it's literally come to the majority of people's front door or backyards, however you want to characterize it. And President Trump and his vice president, J.D. Vance, have been very clear about the policy of, number one, we've got to get all of the illegal people who've come across the border out of this country. And then if they want to pursue legal means to get back in, we will set up that system. But all of these bad people that are creating problems and draining resources that are supposed to be for our nation's most vulnerable citizens that have paid into the system one way or another, we've got to get a control of that. And the president had a very in-depth conversation that I thought it was more revealing than he normally talks on the stump or at his various rallies.
He talked again, did he not, Mandy, about his plan to deport millions of illegals in this country, but I've not really heard him discuss kind of how that would work from a logistics perspective. Do you have any information or insight into that? How do you think that would be facilitated?
Yeah, well, ultimately, that's something that it will depend on who is the head of the Department of Homeland Security, then who ends up over at Customs and Border Protection that has the direct policy authority and direction over ICE and our Border Patrol agents. But what I've heard, J.D. Vance actually talked about this fairly recently. It's to first go after the most obvious, the people who have committed crimes while they've been in the country. If they've committed a crime, instead of just releasing them back on the street, as we've seen under the Biden-Harris administration, they've got to go. So you start with that, and that's actually, it's a fair number, but that should be the low-hanging fruit that up until recent years, most Americans would agree, if you, number one, illegally come into this country, and then number two, commit a crime, especially a violent crime that causes bodily harm to anybody in this country, you've got to go. You don't comport, nor do you have respect for the laws of land. So I've seen that as step one. And then kind of what I believe they would probably do is come up with categories of people, track them, and then ultimately send them back out to Mexico. And there's a lot of logistics that they would have to work on. But I'll tell you this, Gerard, our Border Patrol agents are well equipped to deal with those logistics because they handled it effectively during the Trump administration. You didn't hear about it because it wasn't as big of an issue, but they know how to handle it. They know how to get illegal immigrants that are creating or that are causing crime and undermining the safety and security of American citizens, how to get them out, how to deport them, and then again, how to set up avenues for application of legal immigration for those who actually want to go down that route.
I've not heard a peep that I'm aware of from the Harris campaign about how she would handle the border. And honestly, you first got to acknowledge there's a problem, and I'm not sure they do. And if whatever plan she has to increase border security, why don't they do that now? I mean, she's the vice president and presumably in charge of it.
Yeah, she has had close to 3 years to solve the border. And again, the border was arguably one of the easiest projects that the Biden administration inherited from Team Trump. All they had to do was keep the status quo. They could have done nothing, and the border would have been in a much better position. But instead, they made it a point to repeal anything that President Trump or his appointees had signed onto or thought of. And that created this problem we're currently in. Gerard, I think this is the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. I still don't think she's actually been to the border.
That's
been
correct.
Around the border. She's been in cities that aren't that far, but she hasn't visited the border nor talked to the Border Patrol folks that are down there dealing with the consequences of her bad leftist policies. So we know what her plan is because we've seen it on full display for the last 3 years. And anything she says on the trail at this point is the worst of politics, meaning she's just lying to people to get them to vote for her. And then she's going to reinstate the same policies that have led to the problem we're all dealing with today.
Total failure. All right, talk to us before we go here about the first Mississippi Women's Summit coming up next Monday. You're going to be hosting the Gallo Show at the Oxford Convention Center.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the summit and for the opportunity to interview a lot of the people who are going to be speaking or attending at this inaugural Women's Summit. The purpose really is to bring women in the state together, to network, to empower, to provide direction, and just to celebrate what women can do in this state from a leadership perspective. Men are also welcome to. You don't have to be a woman to attend, but women are highly encouraged. It really is focused on them. For folks who want additional information, you can register on attorneygenerallynnfitch.com. There's a ton of information about the speakers. We have Patricia Scanlon. She is one of the high-level athletes that had to compete against a man. So she'll be talking about protecting women's sports and, safe spaces in sports areas like locker rooms from men just showing up and creating the problems that we've seen. Rachel Duffy, who is a host of numerous Fox shows, the wife to Sean Duffy, former congressman, but really a wonderful woman in her own right that's been very, very successful. They're just a few of the people who are going to be speaking. And I can't think of her first name, Thomas, but the first NFL official from Mississippi. Thank you, Sarah Thomas.
Yeah.
Thank you. She's going to be there as well. So again, people who've broken the glass ceiling, if you will, if you want to buy into that, or just women who've been very successful, who are from this area, want to lift other women up, show them what opportunities are, and to have a really good time and make some really great connections. It's all happening Oxford, August 19th. You can still register. It's free, and I highly encourage anyone who is interested, again, to go to attorneygenerallynnfitch.com.
Yeah, and I think I've got a /Women's Summit to register. So attorneygenerallynnfitch.com/Women's Summit, the URL, if folks want to register. But sounds like you got a great lineup of, as you said, very accomplished women to address the group at the Oxford Convention Center. And you're going to be hosting the Gallo Show up there next week. Ought to be a good one. Mandy, appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard.
Folks, we're stepping aside for a break. We're in the Element Wealth studio, coming right back. Stay with us.